what happens going forward? Is the federal government going to intervene and make TikTok illegal? Or, as our next guest has suggested, is the fate of TikTok actually in the hands of the states? Without further ado, Jake Morabito, Director of the Communications and Technology Task Force over at ALEC. Welcome to the Matt Rooney Show, and happy Easter. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Matt. Happy Easter to you, too.
No, it's my pleasure to have you and also to talk to someone else other than Dan for the next few minutes. He's just out of control. And I think, Jake, part of the problem is I got to him too late. I didn't meet him until he was 21, and he spent too much time on TikTok. His brain was already ruined.
Now we're just
I think we needed to ask ChatGPT whether or not you can dye Easter eggs and eat them.
It's going to be the next TikTok challenge. They're going to call it Danning, right?
Really?
Put a bunch of dye in your food and then eat it and see
what happens. Am I really
the
only one who just eats Easter eggs that have been dyed?
I've never heard of anyone doing it. And I make no warranty as to whether it's safe or not. Look, we'll revisit this when our guest is gone. Okay? Which my wife has actually said that to me before. We'll revisit this when our company leaves, Daniel. In any event, Jake, so let's ask the threshold question up front. Do you think that TikTok is actually on its way out? Or is this just the issue of the moment and it's eventually going to blow over?
Well, there's certainly significant momentum around this idea of banning TikTok. Now, ALEC recently put out a new report kind of analyzing what's been done at the state and federal levels as far as restricting access to TikTok. Now, going back to even as early as 2020, you had some states like Nebraska took the steps to restrict the use of TikTok on all state government devices and state government networks. So think state agency staffers, smartphones and laptops, that type of a thing. This really started to heat up again in December of 2022. And now you've had, since then until today, you have 30 out of 50 states have taken action to restrict TikTok and other Chinese-owned or foreign-owned applications from state networks and state devices. The federal government did the same in December 2022. And then why everyone's talking about it now is because the CEO of TikTok recently testified before Congress about all these concerns that you raised about national security risk and Americans' data. And now there's legislation being introduced at the federal level that would ban TikTok. So that kind of takes us to where we are today. And just for your New Jersey listeners, Governor Murphy did take such a step to restrict TikTok and several other Chinese and foreign-owned companies from their state networks and devices.
He did. And then across the river in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, of course, they've restricted its use at some agencies, but not others. Are you aware of what exactly the logic is of why there's certain agencies and departments in Pennsylvania that have been prohibited from using it, but others not so much?
Yeah, as far as I can understand in the Pennsylvania situation, it was in the individual agency heads in certain departments decided to take steps, but the governor has not done a blanket prohibition across all states. And each state's done it a little differently. Some have had it where it only affects the executive branch. Some it affects all, including the legislature, public universities, and more. And actually, you've had 4 states this legislative session: Idaho, Virginia, Kentucky, and I think Tennessee. They've actually passed legislation at the state level to restrict TikTok, which is more permanent, more lasting than an executive action. So states are active in this space. And again, there's some legislation being introduced at the federal level, although there are some problems with one of the major proposals called the Restrict Act that would some legal analysts and commentators worry that it'll enable the federal government to enact a surveillance regime over American citizens and possibly even being used to restrict American apps because of how it was left pretty vague. The Restrict Act doesn't even mention TikTok by name. So there's anyone who is a fan of limited government and keeping the government out of the private activities. There are some concerns with the way that the legislation is currently written.
And this is the dilemma. You've just touched it with a pin that's facing all Americans that at least want to look at this in not an hysterical way, but in an analytical way. On the one hand, we love government being as restricted as possible. You just said limited government. That's how I feel about it too. And I know most of our listeners do. We also traditionally, as conservatives and people of the right, prefer when states take the lead. They're the laboratories of democracy. At the same time, we know that China is the geopolitical threat of the 21st century, not Russia. It's China. Russia, at best, is a pawn of the Chinese regime at this point. It's a puppet state. And ultimately, it's a national security threat where Dan and I were talking about this earlier tonight on the program. God knows what they're going to be able to accrue in terms of, for example, blackmail vulnerable information on American officials, perhaps their children, and that's only the start of it all. It's scary stuff. So, where does a freedom-minded individual go on this topic? I mean, should we embrace the concerns that are associated with this being a national security risk, and this is just one of those rare issues where it's appropriate for the feds to jump in, or in your mind, is this something where the state should appropriately take the lead and maybe help us figure out where that appropriate balance is?
Well, I think the states have done a great example of, again, each state's done it a little differently, and they've been able to experiment as to which applications are blocked. But also, the free market is at work. And a lot of, as you, I'm sure, have seen, a lot of the other social media applications like Instagram Reels, Snapchat, YouTube Shorts, and there are even some new apps that are cropping up to compete with TikTok. And what kind of brought this to the fore is the fact that TikTok recently revealed that there are 150 million U.S. monthly active users. That's almost half the country logs onto TikTok at least once a month to use it. But the other platforms are catching up. And I think, especially as some of these concerns become more widely known, I think you will see some of those creators and users switch over. In the meantime, I think if the federal government is going to pursue some sort of restrictions on TikTok, they need to laser target the goal here, if it's national security, and figure out what is the best way to achieve that while being the least restrictive on individual citizens' right. Because that's what we're talking about here, right? Is banning private citizens from using a private social media network on their personal devices. So that's a lot different than government devices, where as the employer, and I think it's certainly within the purview of a governor or an agency to say what software can or cannot be used on the devices that taxpayers are paying for. But it's totally different when it's private citizens.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I
also want to jump in here real quick.
Go right ahead.
I have a genuine question for you, Jake. What is the difference between TikTok getting our information and China having all these different, undercover police stations within New York doing the same exact thing? How is this any different than that?
I don't know too much about that second piece you mentioned there, but it is concerning, right? And that's why you have some states like New Jersey and others. It's not just TikTok they've restricted. They've identified some other software, or like in the past, you've heard a lot about telecommunications equipment by Huawei and ZTE, which are two Chinese companies, and the fear that by implementing that telecom equipment, that puts national security at risk here in the U.S. So it's across many different fronts. And again, it's certainly something that state and federal lawmakers should be looking at. But before definitely need to think carefully here. Again, this Restrict Act bill, it's very vaguely written, and I think if anyone's going to be considering this bill, there needs to be some more work to be done to make sure individual rights are protected.
TikTok, something we maybe have to be concerned about, but as usual, the federal government is poised, and this is what I think I'm getting from what you're telling us tonight, Jake. They're poised to overreach. They're poised to use what is a legitimate national security concern, but in addressing it, they're going to try to take a little bit more of our freedom away. And we see this happen over and over again over the course of time. Like case in point, obviously, we needed to take a look at airport security after 9/11, but we all know what the Patriot Act and some of the TSA-related reforms after 9/11 ultimately ended up achieving for the American people. I don't know if we got safer. We certainly got a lot less free. So I think if there is one thing to take away from this conversation, you should always scrutinize anything, anytime the government tries to prohibit your or prescribe your behavior, regardless of what it is, even if there's a very good reason to do it. Jake, how do we find more of your work and more of what ALEC is doing on this particular topic online?
Sure. Anyone can visit our website, alec.org, to learn more about publications like this, about TikTok, but also issues like ChatGPT and a host of model legislation that state legislators can take back to advocate for limited government principles.
And where are you? Are you on Twitter, Facebook? Are you on TikTok? Do you have a TikTok?
I do not have a TikTok. You can find me on Twitter. If you go to ALEC.org, you can see the handle.
Perfect. Dan has a TikTok. I do not. And
I do.
And he's not getting rid of it. You can take it from his cold, dead hand. That's
correct.
That's how strongly he feels about TikTok. Jake Morabito from ALEC, Director of Communications and Technology Task Force over there, doing some very interesting work and helping us shed light on this important issue. We appreciate you joining us on Easter, no less. Hope to talk to you again soon about this topic.
Great. Thanks for having me on.
Take care, Jake. Thanks.